is CNN Breaking News.
Plus, President Trump makes a campaign-style speech to lay out his national security strategy. He made sure to slam his predecessors, of course, but somehow failed to call out Moscow for meddling in other countries, even though the 48-page document that lays out his strategy does exactly that. Wonder why he just couldn't bring himself to say so. Also, a CNN exclusive to tell you about. Sources telling CNN President Trump is so sure he'll be cleared in the Russia investigation, cleared in the next few weeks, he expects Robert Mueller to send him a letter of exoneration. One source worrying the president will have a meltdown if that does not happen. And it comes as the president's allies work to discredit Mueller. We'll talk all about that, but let's get right to the very latest now on that Amtrak derailment. CNN's Kyung Law live for us in Tacoma at this hour. Kyung, good evening to you. What are you learning about the investigation into this derailment?
Well, we're just hearing from the Washington State Patrol, and they tell us that they have now finished searching through all of the passenger cars of this train. There was a lot of concern, especially about a couple of those precarious train cars that were hanging off onto I-5, onto Interstate 5, about who might be left in there. Well, they've been able to search through all of them. There are 3 confirmed fatalities per the officials. That's the official count. At this point, we don't know if that number is going to be moving. 100 people, 77 people aboard the train, but there were 100 people because there were also drivers down below. They were taken to the hospital. A number of them have been treated and released. As far as the investigation itself, Don, we are hoping to learn much more when the NTSB has a news conference in just about 3 hours. There is a 20-person investigative team that is on their way here because this is so curious. They don't know why this happened. These train tracks that you see behind me, this is the corridor that was just upgraded. I'm just a short distance away from where this crash happened. This is the first day of this corridor running, and this was upgraded to handle Amtrak trains traveling at a higher rate of speed, a max speed of 79 miles per hour. Now, Amtrak did tell CNN that at this point, they can confirm that the positive train control, that it was not activated. So there are going to be a lot of questions about this technology. Why wasn't it activated? And Amtrak also released a statement. If you know somebody aboard this train, if you are connected to this train crash, here's what Amtrak wants you to know, saying, quote, families with questions about individuals on the train can contact 800-523-9101. We will do everything in our power to support these passengers, our employees, and their families. Back live here, what you're looking at is a sign. There are a number of these signs posted at all of these crossings. A lot of concern by some of the local mayors here, especially one, the mayor of Lakewood, Washington. These signs were posted because they were concerned about passengers, drivers running into these new trains that are coming through this heavily trafficked area, this community, Don. So certainly the fact that this has happened on its very first day, a lot of concern among the people who live here about how this happened.
Kyung Law in Tacoma for us. Kyung, thank you very much. We're going to continue to have more on this deadly derailment a little bit later on in the show. But now I want to turn to President Trump's reaction to all of this and the other news as well. We're going to discuss that with CNN's politics editor at large, Chris Cillizza, and political analyst Kirsten Powers. Good evening to both of you. Chris, I'm going to start with you. You're here in the studio. President Trump chimed in on this train derailment. Let me just read the statement here, what he said. He tweeted this out. The train accident that just occurred in DuPont, Washington shows more than ever why our soon-to-be submitted infrastructure plan must be approved quickly. $7 trillion spent in the Middle East while our roads, bridges, and tunnels and railways and more crumble. Not for long. So he didn't mention the victims.
No, he didn't. And by the way, this is at, my memory serves me, that tweet was sent at 1:41 in Eastern time this afternoon, Don. And that was clearly a time when we knew less than we know now. And as Kyung points out, there's still a lot of details we don't know. In a vacuum, okay, it's a little odd tweet, but in a vacuum, okay. This isn't in a vacuum, though. Context, Pulse nightclub shooting. Donald Trump tweets out shortly after 49 people have been killed. He says, everyone is telling me congrats for being right about radical Islamic terror. Here in New York City, last month, 8 people are killed when a man takes his car and puts it on the sidewalk. Trump tweets out again, sort of I was right, other people were wrong, this is a serious threat. So it's the context that matters here, and the context makes it look very clearly as though he looks to politics and political advantage first, then he sends out that second tweet 10 or 11 minutes later today saying what most presidents would have said first.
We can put the second tweet up. The president did follow it with a tweet with another one 10 minutes later expressing his sympathies for the victims. But also, Chris, I'm going to stick with you. The other big news today is, according to sources inside the White House, that President Trump expects a special counsel, Robert Mueller, to begin wrapping up his investigation soon and expects to be fully exonerated. President Trump's opinion seems to fly in the face of everything we know about this Mueller investigation. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, I mean, I always remind people I'm not a lawyer, much to my parents' chagrin. So, you know, but I would say, look, Mike Flynn, the former national security advisor and someone who is in the innermost of inner circles in Trump world, just pled guilty to what we believe to be one of the lesser charges against him. We knew a lot about Turkey and his influence over there. He pled guilty to lying to the FBI and is now cooperating with the Mueller investigation. It would seem odd to me, given that that happened a month ago, that suddenly this investigation would conclude. That would suggest it's opening more broadly, maybe targets above Flynn, which aren't that many people, candidly, but Mueller clearly thinks there is something that Flynn knows, or some things that Flynn knows, that is worth this plea deal. So I just don't see it. I mean, Donald Trump can think whatever he likes, but I don't see, based on what we know of the investigation, that that's going to happen.
But if you guys listen closely, I mean, Kirsten, if you listen very closely to the president, if you listen to his folks, and if you listen to the people who, you know, say good things about him all day long, as Fox News, they always say there's no evidence of collusion. They seem to forget that this investigation can involve more than collusion, can be and or collusion, or whatever is in the scope of the special counsel. So it's, you know, maybe he's thinking that there is no evidence so far about collusion and that he may be exonerated on that end, but it's certainly not the end of the investigation that we know of.
Well, he also doesn't know what's been found, and he doesn't know, you know, we don't know what's happening. This investigation isn't being done publicly, it's being done privately. And, you know, we get leaks from time to time, but they're not, almost definitely not coming from the person who's in charge of the entire investigation. And so I think that it's premature to think that, that he will be cleared. I think even the idea of this type of letter being proffered is pretty unprecedented. It's not really something that happens. So, you know, where he got this idea or why he's decided this, and it's making him very cheerful, apparently. I think he's gotten some bad information. I just don't think this is something that is in the cards.
Yeah, and you're shaking your head with.
Well, I mean, look, I think Kirsten makes the right point, which is Donald Trump said no collusion. Everyone says no collusion. I would refer back. First of all, Mueller has said nothing effectively to this point about the investigation. Right. Publicly, particularly about collusion. Second, Richard Burr and Mark Warner, the chairman and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, have said, we haven't found collusion yet. We're continuing to look. Does that mean there's none? Maybe, but what it suggests, and this is Kirsten's point, is this is not a finished investigation, not on the House and Senate side, and not on the White House side. I understand why he's doing it.
My point, though, this investigation is not just about collusion.
No, it's about much more than that, without question.
Right, yeah. So
he is fixated on that. And, well, Don, look, this investigation is also not, as I like to remind people, is also not a function of Democrats bitter about the election.
Exactly.
Rod Rosenstein appointed Bob Mueller, who, by the way, is a Republican. Rod Rosenstein works for the Trump Justice Department. So, yeah. I mean, the idea that Democrats are behind this is...
Kirsten, I interrupted you, but here's another point. What happens if that doesn't happen? I mean, if he is exonerated, he's entitled to a letter. I mean, he is a president of the United States or some sort of thing saying, okay, you're exonerated. But how will he react if that's not the case, you think?
Well, according to people who are close to him, at least the reporting that's been done, they're concerned that he will melt down. And I think that he would react very badly to not being exonerated, because look, I'm not saying that he couldn't. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if they actually, you'd have to ask somebody who, you know, who has dealt with these kinds of things firsthand, whether or not you can get a letter that says you're exonerated. But certainly if he was exonerated, that would, hopefully would be made public, but he's reacted so badly just to being investigated. So I can't imagine what would happen if he was actually found guilty, which is why he and the rest of the administration and Fox News and other people who are Trump allies are working so hard to discredit the investigation, because if he is found guilty, it's very important that they have discredited it and made people believe that these were people that had a political axe to grind with Donald Trump.
Yeah. I want to talk about Sarah Palin's son. Her oldest son arrested and charged with assault against his father, Todd. It's a pretty bizarre story, but there have been issues.
That's right.
Domestic issues within this family.
Right. This is the second time in 2 years he's been arrested on domestic violence charges. 2016, arrested for hitting his girlfriend at the time. At that time, Sarah Palin suggested it was actually happened right before Sarah Palin was endorsing Donald Trump for president, interestingly enough, and Sarah Palin suggested at the time that it might have been post-traumatic stress disorder and that Barack Obama didn't understand the plight of veterans. This incident, I mean, you know, as a father of sons, it's young sons, but still very depressing. He tracked Palin, according to the affidavit, came over to Sarah and Todd Palin's house, said he was getting a truck. Todd Palin brandished a weapon. Track Palin broke in, hit his father in the head repeatedly, and was wandering around, according again to the affidavit, was wandering around, referring to the police as peasants, and then was taken into custody without any sort of, no further incident. But yeah, I mean, twice in 2 years, not great and worrisome, I think, for the family. Sarah Palin has asked sort of respectful distance in terms of her son in the situation.
Do we know if there's anything to? Is there anything to confirm, Kirsten, that Track Palin is suffering from PTSD? And if he is, I mean, it's awful. But do we know anything further than what's been?
I mean, if he, you know, if she says he's suffering from PTSD, I take her at face value. Yeah. I don't, and look, families, you know, have problems. Yep. And, you know, I don't think that, you know, anybody should be sitting around saying, oh, my family's so much better than their family. I mean, all families have problems.
Especially not this time of year when we're all going to get together.
Yeah, and this is sad. This is tragic. I mean, it's a horrible thing to have a son, you know, attack his father. But I hope nobody here is, but I hope other people aren't being gleeful about this, because I think, again, these are the types of things that many families have to deal with.
Yeah, it's just a bizarre story.
And
no one is taking
by the way, Don, Track Palin, for folks wondering, he did serve a year in Iraq. Yeah. So, I mean, this is somebody who is a veteran.
Yeah. Thank you. Whatever it is, we hope he gets back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. When we come back, the president's speech today seemed to gloss over some pretty significant parts of his national security strategy, especially when it comes to Russia. So, is the president fully on board with his own policy? The president making a speech today on his national security policy and saying a lot less about Russia than one might expect, especially since the 48-page document that lays out his policy specifically calls out Russia for trying to undermine democracies. Here to discuss now all of this, Max Boot, the senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of The Road Not Taken, Edward Lansdale and the American Tragedy in Vietnam. Also Ambassador James Woolsey, former director of the CIA. Looking very dapper, I should say.
I got the card. The memo said we're all supposed to be in black tie.
He had a function tonight that was honoring someone. So thank you for coming on. Sure. We appreciate you taking the time. I want to play this and then get you to respond. The president's speech was very different from the national security plan. Here's part of what he said today.
We also face rival powers, Russia and China, that seek to challenge American influence, values, and wealth. We will attempt to build a great partnership with those and other countries, but in a manner that always protects our national interest.
Ambassador, have we seen this administration protecting our national interests, especially when it comes to Russia and China?
Well, I think President Trump started out with a propensity to work together with Russia, but not China, particularly where he was worried about tariff issues and the like. He's turned over the course of the last year, 6 months, to work pretty well with China and get along reasonably well with China and with Russia as well. The long paper that the speech was taken from was really fairly critical of Russia on some key points. Russia has, after all, been interfering in other countries' elections since the 1920s, 1930s. What's new is cyber. What's new is they don't have to send agents over undercover or something in order to Photoshop a photograph and try to get it accepted as real or whatever. They can do so much through cyber that they're not tampering in many ways the way they used to. They're tampering far more effectively, and some of that I think comes through in the long paper, maybe only a little bit of it in the speech.
So let's speak about the long paper here, because the actual White House document specifically calls Russia, this is for you, Max, it says, it calls Russia actors using information tools in an attempt to undermine the legitimacy of democracies. The document also says Russia uses information operations as part of its offensive cyber efforts to influence public opinion, access to across the globe. Its influence campaigns blend covert intelligence operations and false online personas with state-funded media, third-party intermediaries, and paid social media users or trolls. That's a big difference from what we heard today, as he refers to as the long paper, the 48-page document. What's more important, the document or what the president says?
Well, I think you've put your finger on it, Don, which is there's a huge disconnect between the national security strategy that was announced today, and that was really the work of H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor, and his senior aide, Nadia Shadlow. There's a big difference between what they had to say and what Donald Trump himself says. And it's not just on Russia, although there is a huge disconnect on Russia, because H.R. McMaster has spoken for a long time about the threat that we face from Russia, and the national security strategy is very clear about the fact that the Russians are not our friends and that they are subverting other democracies. But Trump himself will never say a negative word about Putin, and he will never admit that the Russians interfered in our elections. And that's just one example of this disconnect. I mean, there are many others in the document itself which suggests that it's not really speaking for Donald Trump per se, it's speaking for General McMaster. And I agree with a lot of what's in the national security strategy, but I'm just concerned that it doesn't actually represent Donald Trump's own thinking.
That's a good point, though. So, Ambassador, how useful is this document if the president doesn't share its views?
I think taken together, the two together, are useful and on the whole reasonably statesmanlike. The key lesson we ought to draw from this is that, especially since the Russians have been interfering with elections all over the world since the 20s or 30s, they call it disinformatia, disinformation. They have huge numbers of people devoted to it. What we have to do is save our next election. The key thing people have to do is make sure that we can do recounts. You've got to have a paper trail if you're going to do a recount. You can't do it if everything's electric and everything that was electric got hacked. And there are other things that need to be done as well. But the lesson we ought to draw from this is not, did the Russians do a little bit more or a little bit less? The lessons we ought to draw is we need to get busy and get the election machinery fixed in all our states.
But it's hard to safeguard future elections if we have a president who won't admit that we were attacked in a previous election, and it's been reported that he has not convened a single meeting in the White House to figure out about how to strike back against this Russian campaign to undermine our democracy. I think that's a huge problem.
Striking back is important, but even more important is getting the machinery fixed so that we can defend against it, and it can't happen in a year and a half.
But he seems to believe whatever Vladimir Putin says, and it's not like they're not talking, because he has called him, he spoke to him yesterday. It's their second call in 4 days, praising the CIA for preventing a terror attack in Russia. I mean, as a former CIA director, is this normal protocol?
Well, we do this sort of thing all the time with the British and our friends, other friends, and so forth. But doing it with Russia is new, to me at least. But on the other hand, it's not a bad idea if one doesn't inadvertently disclose sources and methods in doing it. But if you can tip the Russians off about a terrorist attack, or the Chinese, I would leave Iran and North Korea alone. I wouldn't try to work with either of them. But to work with Russia and not disclose anything we shouldn't disclose to them and help them avoid a terrorist attack, I think that's a manageable part of national security.
I mean, nobody would disagree working with the Russians on certain issues. I think the issue here is that Donald Trump seems to have a very starry-eyed view of Vladimir Putin, as well as other dictators like Xi Jinping and others. That's not the viewpoint that comes across in the national security strategy, but it's definitely Trump's own mindset, and it's very troubling because he does not call out these dictators for their aggressive actions.
I think he started being very friendly to the Russians. I think he's woken up some. And one really good test for a president is whether they can learn. And I think we see a learning process going on here, and I think that's good.
All right. It's going to have to be the last word. Thank you both. I appreciate it. When we come back, a CNN exclusive. Sources say not only does President Trump is expected to be exonerated by Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, he expects Mueller to send him a letter saying so. How will the president react if that doesn't happen? A CNN exclusive tonight. Sources telling CNN that President Trump believes the Russia investigation is coming to a close and that he expects the special counsel Robert Mueller not only to clear him, but to write a letter of exoneration. I'm going to bring in now CNN national security analyst Julia Kayyem, and a former official at the Department of Homeland Security, and CNN contributor John Dean, the former White House counsel for President Nixon. Good evening to both of you. John, CNN has learned that in private, the president has seemed, quote, less frustrated about the investigation, even boasting that he expects Mueller to clear him of wrongdoing in the coming weeks. Do you have any idea why the president is feeling so confident?
I can only imagine that his lawyers told him something that gave him that confidence. And if they did, they may well be engaging in malpractice because they have no basis that I can see, or anybody I know who follows this even closer than I do can see. I think it's wishful thinking at this point.
Do you agree with that, Juliet?
Yes, I mean, this is the same president who began this investigation assuring the American public that there had been absolutely no contacts between his campaign and the Russians. Donald Trump's statements or beliefs about this investigation have never been accurate and will probably continue not to be accurate. We should have every belief that Mueller is going to continue well into 2018. The activity so far has been fast and quick with 2 indictments and 2 guilty pleas. That is very fast and it will continue apace. There's just no evidence that this thing is slowing down. If anything, it's getting closer to Donald Trump.
Let me read this. This is Susan Hennessy's tweet from earlier. She's our legal analyst here on CNN. She said, if Trump or his team actually believe this, wouldn't they be working to bolster or at least not undermine Mueller's legitimacy and credibility? Why work to undercut the reputation of the guy you say is about to clear you? So what do you think, Juliet? Do you believe that? Should Trump have his supporters back off of Mueller?
Well, I just think that the Trump White House must be very, very nervous about what is about to unfold in the weeks ahead, because just this campaign against Mueller is consistent with the campaign over the last year. You know, it begins with an assault on the facts, right? Russia didn't hack. Even the national security strategy today is just shocking in the fact it does not even mention that the Russians attacked our own democracy. Then there's an attack on the fact seekers, the CIA, the FBI. They're in disarray. They're horrible. They're captured. They're political. And then there's an attack now on the fact investigator, Robert Mueller. It's like in their playbook and consistent, right, with the fact that they actually don't know what's coming down the pike. So in my mind, we could have anticipated this. And in their mind, I suspect they are very nervous, maybe not about Trump, but about people very close to him, like a son or a son-in-law.
John, what do you think is behind this apparent strategy to undercut Mueller?
Well, it's happened in prior special counsel investigations. It happened during the Clinton years. There was some effort to undercut Ken Starr when they thought he'd gone purely political, and indeed some of his actions were very political. Mueller has not played it that way, though. He's played it as very much a sealed, quiet, very cautious professional that he is. So it's an effort to undercut whatever they see coming, and they must sense something serious is coming. Don, they have thrown nothing but signals that they're covering up from the very beginning. They have never shown really an effort to cooperate. They've never shown an effort to send people down to testify. They've never tried to reveal anything about what actually did happen. In fact, this information is slowly pulled out, one meeting at a time, one email at a time, and we know that Mueller knows a lot more than we do, and he obviously sees something there, or it wouldn't have been so protracted.
Yeah, Juliet, I just want to play. This is a clip of the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. It's from earlier today. Take a listen, and then we'll discuss.
I think this past weekend is illustrative of what a great case officer Vladimir Putin is. He knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president.
I just want to be clear here, though. You're saying that Russia is treating the president of the United States as an asset.
I'm saying this figuratively. I think you have to remember Putin's background. He's a KGB officer. That's what they do. They recruit assets. And I think some of that experience and instincts of Putin is coming to play here in his managing a pretty important account for him, if I could use that term, with our president.
So Juliet, Clapper said that he was speaking figuratively. You heard that, but what do you think about that comment?
He may have been speaking figuratively, but Clapper is very careful. I don't think he would just sort of willy-nilly use words like that. And I think from any perspective, it's clear that Putin is playing Trump. He's playing up to Trump's desire to be liked and Trump's desire to be viewed as different than President Obama. But what I liked most about Jim Clapper's statement is to remind us that this is actually not about Donald Trump. Today, a national security strategy was announced. We have a homeland to protect. We have elections this coming year, and we've done absolutely nothing to defend ourselves. So while Trump may view this as about himself, it really is about our democracy, and it's sort of worth all of us remembering that each time we think about the indictments or whether Mueller should have had those emails. I mean, it's all irrelevant to the fact that the story is that Russia took advantage of our democracy and will do so again in the year to come.
Juliet, John, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. When we come back, why the Trump administration has reportedly banned the CDC from using certain words like fetus, transgender, and science-based. Growing backlash tonight following a report that the Trump administration has ordered officials at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to stop using specific words and phrases in budget documents for 2018. Joining me now is John McWhorter, professor of linguistics at Columbia University and the author of Words on the Move. John, hello. Let's talk about words that may not be on the move here, because this is a list of 7 words the Washington Post reports the Trump administration has banned officials at the CDC from using in the budget process. The words are diversity, entitlement, evidence-based, fetus, science-based, transgender, vulnerable. Why these words, and what does that tell you about this administration?
Well, from the way I'm seeing it, it looks that these are words that people within the organization thought it would be wise to not use because they wanted to see their budgets more likely to be passed by people in the government, for example, who would be offended by words like those because they're worried about things like something being evidence-based. They don't want to hear fetuses being brought up, etc. And what that means is that we're dealing with an administration and administration culture in which people in positions of responsibility are having to basically work around the gorilla in order to get what they need to do done, such as an organization like the CDC really needs to. They have to tone down or disguise basically truth and common sense and constructiveness in order to get the money to do the things that they need to do. And that's a tragedy.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The Post says that the administration did propose some alternative phrases. So rather than using, and I'll give you some, the terms science-based or evidence-based, CDC officials should use the phrases or the phrase CDC bases its recommendation on science in consideration with community standards and wishes. I mean, what is different about the new approved technology? What is this?
Well, it's interesting because that way of putting it, for example, is a dog whistle, this idea of community standards. That is, you're trying to work with people who might be, for example, pro-life, people who don't want certain things brought up, community standard, as opposed to, for example, what we might call science. And so we're talking about people who might have the idea that evolution is, quote unquote, just a theory. And that in itself is a shame. And to the extent To the extent that just possibly we're dealing with the administration or anybody else who thinks that if you apply a new label to something, you're solving a problem. That never works. Whatever you didn't like about the label at this point, those associations will settle down upon whatever the new label is. And so there was a time when crippled was an okay term that nobody was offended by. Well, there are unfortunate associations that many people have with somebody who is quote unquote crippled, and so that word was replaced with handicapped. Then handicapped came to have the same sorts of problems. We human beings are a pretty trashy group in many ways. And so changing the words does not change the thought. Orwell, and I know everybody's waiting for me to bring him up, was wrong about that. You can't control thought that starkly with words.
Well, I want to say that because you hear the word Orwellian a lot when you read, this story. Is this how you would describe this as Orwellian?
Well, you could say that it's Orwellian in that somebody thinks that if you use different words, then you're going to change the way people think or change the situation. But the problem is, for example, here, even if you are trying to do some good by avoiding using terms that are going to rile what I think in this case are people who are Republican / right wing / have certain ideas about, abortion or evolution that many other people don't share. If the idea is that you're going to use different words, frankly, that's not really going to work because those people are intelligent enough to see through your attempt to soften. I mean, they are, cognitively human just like all the rest of us. And so it wouldn't work. You have to actually try to change thought. But I do think that these people are trying to do some good. It's unfortunate that they have to work that hard to do it.
All right. Speaking, and I may go back to some of these words, but speaking of Orwell, here's another story from the New York Times that kind of sounds like Big Brother. The EPA employees spoke out. Then came scrutiny of their email. The Times reports that multiple EPA employees with different jobs in different cities spoke about budget cuts or climate change policies at the agency. Then a conservative campaign research group consulting with the EPA filed a FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act, request for all their federal emails. Why would the EPA sic an Oppo research group on its own employees?
It seems like there's some sort of surveillance. It's the usual story where we're not supposed to say anything bad about, say, the president or his policies, that we're all supposed to walk in a kind of lockstep. And that's unfortunate in this case because, of course, if you're public-spirited, then part of that is understanding that there is going to be opposition and that there are different ways of doing things and that we're all working towards the same mountaintop through different paths. You don't see that in a possible practice like that one.
Yeah. So the Oppo research firm hired by the EPA specializes in, quote, war room type technology for robust intelligence gathering. Are you comfortable with the EPA spending taxpayer money on a partisan-style war room inside the agency to research its own employees?
Well, I mean, to the extent that money is being spent on something like that, that sort of monitoring is frightening because especially when you're dealing with an organization like the EPA, we're looking for innovative ideas. We're looking for people who are searching for things that might not be obvious and to monitor people. And the only reason you would monitor people is to avoid them saying certain things, is to stanch that kind of creativity and that kind of open-mindedness. So it's very dangerous.
Yeah. Listen, the CDC, we're talking about the banned words and so on. The CDC is saying that, I want to assure you, they released a statement saying, I want to assure you there are no banned words at the CDC. We will continue to talk about all of our important public health programs, and that's what the CDC says. But when words are banned, emails are targeted, reporters and news outlets are under attack, is freedom of speech at risk with this administration?
Yes, I do think that there's a real problem here where it almost seems as if the president or just a culture that's beginning to surround the president really do believe that people shouldn't be allowed to be too, we might say, seditious in reference to the president. And the problem with this is that I don't even think that there's a philosophical or pragmatic orientation behind it. The idea isn't we want to get things done and therefore we want to keep a united front and hide argument behind all of that. What it's really just about is that the person running the country doesn't like being criticized because he's a very insecure and narcissistic man. That is what's percolating out into the culture, that you shouldn't say anything bad about him and his policies. But this comes not from a hard-headed pragmatism that you might from some perspective, admire, but it just comes from the bullheadedness of the individual that happens to be running the country and isn't public spirited enough to see beyond his tiny self. That's what's unfortunate about all this.
John McWhorter, the author of Words on the Move. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Don.
We'll be right back. Breaking news is at least 3 people killed, 100 injured in a horrific Amtrak derailment in Washington state. I want to bring out Daniel Conzel, and he's an eyewitness to the crash who helped to rescue passengers. He joins us via Skype. Daniel, thank you so much for coming on. You were driving to work, I'm told, with your girlfriend when you came across the Amtrak train derailment. What did you see?
Yeah, we were coming down I-5 South. We had actually seen the train as we were driving. We were kind of parallel with it, and then it was going faster than us and didn't really think anything of it. But then we came to the bridge and we saw the train that had just gone by us about 45 seconds before hanging off of the bridge, like you've seen in all the pictures. And I was like, is that like the train that just went by us? And then it sort of settled in. Whoa, this is major, like a major train wreck. So we, Alicia and I got off the freeway as fast as we could, parked the car. We were both in dress clothes. I was in a suit. And luckily I had an emergency headlamp and some boots in the back of my van. And we ran down to the tracks as fast as we could.
What was the scene like once you got there, Daniel?
Yeah, we were there probably 15 minutes before any first responders got there, and nobody knew what to do. Nobody was directing or leading, and a lot of the people who were in the train wreck were sort of in shock, just kind of wandering around. So when we got there, honestly, it was like chaos. And my personal mission was to just try to lead until the first responders got there. So I immediately just tried to organize the people who were in the wreck and get them down to the freeway so that they could get treatment. So you were able
to help get people off the train?
Yes. So initially I climbed into the train car that was positioned sideways on the bridge and made sure that everybody in there was stable. And if they could get out, helped them out. And if they had an injury, made sure that there was people there to attend to them and stay with them. And then just kind of systematically worked my way through the cars until the first responders got there, and probably was able to help, I would say, 15 people get out before the firefighters or police officers arrived.
Well, good job, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us here on CNN.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Let's bring in now Mary Schiavo, the former Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Mary, it's good to see you. I wish it was under better circumstances. Images from the crash scene, they show the train cars ended up all over the place. You can see in the video that we have up there, disconnected from each other. Does that give you any indication of what kind of errors could have occurred?
Oh, it sure does. You know, so many times we look at these train derailments and the train has gone off the tracks, or it's next to the track, or it's run down an embankment. But here they literally look like they have been strewn about, like leaves blown about in a wind. And that gives us a pretty good idea that it was a speed related incident. That speed on this curve, for whatever reason, had caused the train cars to have great inertial force, most likely as it was making the turn. Based on the maps that I've seen, of course, it was heading into the turn, and reports now say that perhaps that turn should have been taken at 30 miles an hour, and other reports say this train might have been going as fast as 81 miles an hour. Now, none of this is confirmed, but that would indicate that nothing's ever as simple as it sounds, but that the train was taking the curve far, far too fast. Yeah. Why is another issue.
Yeah, do you remember we were talking about, I think the last time we talked about this, something like this, was the Philadelphia train derailment, and we talked about positive train control. Yes. The president also says that positive train control, that technology designed to slow a train down automatically, was not activated at the time. Could it have made a difference here?
Oh yes, here in this kind of an accident is exactly where positive train control could have made a huge difference. And you know, it's not illegal that it wasn't activated because rail operators have been given extensions. The government has extended the deadline by which trains have to comply, or owners of the track have to comply with positive train control activation. And you know, the issue for that, the reason they have been given so many extensions, has been money. Now, it is expensive to put it on the tracks all over the country, but this track, this particular section, just had a huge upgrade. It was about $180 million that was spent on perhaps about a 15-mile segment of track. Sounds like a lot, but when you're involved with rail, it's not really. But the train track should have been brought up to date.
Yeah. Mary Schiavo, thank you very much. Appreciate your expertise every time. When we come back, Tavis Smiley's talk show is dropped over what PBS calls troubling allegations. And tonight, Tavis Smiley claims they made a huge mistake. He is here tonight. This is CNN Tonight. I'm Don Lemon. It's 11 p.m. here on the East Coast, and we're live with new developments tonight. The Republican tax bill could be on the president's desk on Wednesday. And if you still don't know exactly how it will affect you, you are not alone. And what about the politics of it? Why sign a bill into law that could hurt you badly with the suburban voters who have been costing Republicans elections lately? What will it mean for 2018? And why do real estate businesses, specifically, like, say, the Trump families, save millions? We're going to dig into those questions for you. Plus, talk show host Tavis Smiley fighting back against what are being called troubling allegations about his conduct.
I can tell you that we've had a bit of breaking news in this case.
We'll tell you what that breaking news is. He says his side of the story tonight here on this program, but I'm going to ask him, what about those troubling allegations? Let's begin, though, with the GOP tax bill and what it could mean for you. Here to discuss is Gene Sperling, who was a national economic advisor to Presidents Obama and Clinton. And Grover Norquist is also here. He is the president of Americans for Tax Reform. Good evening to both of you. Good to see you. Happy holidays to you both. Yeah. Gene, here's the president talking about the tax plan today, and then we'll talk.
We are days away from passing historic tax cuts for American families and businesses. It will be the biggest tax cut and tax reform in the history of our country.
Your reaction?
This is, I think, a monstrosity. You know, here we have such serious problems, Don. We have people worried about a hollowing out of the middle class, about economic inequality, economic insecurity. There's so much we could have done with $1.5 trillion. We could have done something significant on infrastructure. We could have cut taxes just for working families who are really hard pressed. We should have done something about skills, free community college. And instead, we're going to give the major bulk of this to the largest companies, to foreign investors, to the most well-off investors and pass-throughs, such as real estate, such as the Trump family, and there's going to be no conditions. It's not going to be tied to job creation or wage creation. It's just going to be a giveaway.
Is this why you call it, you said this was a wasted opportunity?
It is a wasted opportunity because if we are going to do something major on tax reform, you know, here's an idea. If you're going to spend $1.5 trillion, why not give it all to the working families who need it most? This is a bill that actually puts working families so last that it actually sunsets it. So by 2027, the last year of the plan, 82% of the benefit goes to the top 1%, and everybody under 90,000 is going to get a tax increase.
I want Grover to weigh in. Grover, I know you want to weigh in on this, but let me ask you this, and then you can say your piece here. This bill, it was rushed through both houses of Congress at lightning speed, and it's a major overhaul of the tax code. What kind of unintended consequences do you think might be hiding in the bill?
Okay, well, two things. That's a narrative from people who haven't been paying attention for the last 5 years. If the press has chosen not to cover the camp bill, which ran through the entire House program and worked out many of these issues, the hearings that the House and Senate have had and all these discussions over the last years, the press has only in the last several weeks gone, oh my goodness, there's a tax bill, and they haven't paid any attention to what's in it. It's not a surprise to people. These things have been written down, they've been discussed, and they've been put in legislative language over the last 5 years and more for some of these ideas.
Okay, Grover, let me just stop you right there, and then I'll let you finish. Is that the same bill that came out of conference? Because you're talking about another bill, and the administration has just started talking about this bill. Republicans have just started talking about this bill. Most people have not even had a chance to read the bill, and I'm talking about lawmakers.
No. Look, you have two bills. There's the House bill and the Senate bill. But these have been in the works for more than 5 years. The camp bill, which a lot of these ideas come out of, was actually put forward in the House and went through the committee process a couple of years ago. This is another iteration of that. The idea that this is rushed through or a secret is only from people who don't choose to look at it.
But Grover, with all due respect, a lot of bills have elements from other bills. It doesn't make them the same bill. Okay. And I mean, we could go back through history and talk about this bill begat that bill, and then that bill begat that, and this came from this. But I mean, let's just be honest here. This bill is a new bill from both the Congress and the Senate and from this administration, just as this is a new administration. This isn't a bill that came from this administration. You're talking about the camp bill. That's from a time gone by.
Okay, that's the camp. It's 2 years ago. Okay, and 3 years now. This was the Republican Congress. I mean, the Republicans have had the Congress and the Senate for quite some time, and they've been working on these issues, and I work with them on it. So it's not a surprise to me because I pay attention to what they've been focused on. The idea of the fact that we have a 35% business tax, corporate income tax, and the rest of the Europeans are down in the 20s. Socialist China's at 25. We're at 35. Even Obama thought this was a problem and talked about promising to bring that rate from 35 down. He talked about 28. But he recognized the importance of bringing he didn't think that was a giveaway to anybody. The idea that letting somebody keep money they earned is giving it to them strikes me as an odd understanding of who owns your life. When you walk down the street and a mugger passes you by, he didn't give you your wallet. He didn't take it.
I want Jeannie to respond to this because Jeannie keeps talking about other bills in this camp bill. Did those other bills have,
This is the bill that is going to become the law of the land, that people are going to live by, be punished by, get around. It's been rushed through. This president talked about he was going to come in and drain the swamp. When these bills come through, it's only the swamp that actually knows what's in it. You don't know what the last minute changes are. And you know what? Grover's right about one thing. I was part of President Obama's team, and we thought you could bring down the corporate rates, but we were going to do it in a way that it didn't cost other taxpayers a penny, wasn't going to increase the deficit. We were going to use one-time money for a major infrastructure bill. So to say that is similar to a bill that is going to explode the deficit by as much as perhaps $2 trillion is going to give a tax cut that actually raises a tax reform plan that actually raises taxes on most people by its 10th year plan, done with things scribbled on the side, virtually no hearings. I mean, the process is terrible. It's again, the only people are the lobbyists who know what's in it before anybody else does. That's exactly the opposite of what President Trump talked about. And the outcome is a plan that's going to disappoint workers. It doesn't help most working families. Okay. And I think misses what is really needed to help the middle class in our country.
You're talking about this other bill, but Democrats are pointing to the last minute change in the plan that specifically benefits real estate businesses as well. That wasn't in the camp bill, was it?
No, it was in the House bill. There's a House version of how do you deal with pass-throughs and a Senate version. And as they went through, they accepted the House version dealing with real estate rather than the Senate version. And then they turned around and say some senator slipped it in, which was a damnable lie. And they had to know that. And Senator Hatch wrote a very tough letter, these jerks who were out putting that case. The idea that somehow Corker had switched his vote. Corker's been for this bill since the beginning. He came up with a 1.5 limit on how much of tax reduction we're going to do in 10 years. And I spoke to him for half an hour 2 days before. He ended up voting against it because the parliamentarian wouldn't let his idea in, not the Republicans. They were perfectly happy to do that. Of course he was going to vote for it. He's a Republican. He's a Reagan Republican. When you talk about the Senate and the House get together and the Senate version or the House version gets picked, there are dozens of those decisions that go into, but they're all doing the same thing. We take the business taxes down for companies, which even the Democrats agreed ought to be done because it's so bad for us. We also do it for Subchapter S. This is the 28 million pass-through companies, small businesses generally, which when every time you raise the personal rate,
I'm running out of time, Grover. I got to get Gene to respond to what you said quickly if you can.
Well, look, the truth is that this tax cut goes overwhelmingly to the major national corporations. There's a huge difference because it is a giveaway. It doesn't ask them to give up tax expenditures. It just increases the deficit. And that money that they spend on these large corporations and pass-throughs that are often wealthy people, even billionaires, come at the expense of middle-class families not getting a significant tax cut, and will come at the expense of them when the Republicans try to cut Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security to pay for the deficit explosion they've created.
Of time. Thank you, Grover. Thank you, Gene. I appreciate it. President Trump making an appearance at the Disney World today. The animatronic Trump, that is, we're talking about Disney World today, unveiling its life-size robot version of President Trump, seen in this video from www.magic.com. Well, that's interesting.
From the beginning, America has been a nation defined by its people.
The 45th president joining his predecessors in the famous Hall of Presidents exhibit. The unveiling was originally supposed to happen in late June, but in a blog post, Disney World suggested that the president had not yet recorded his dialogue for Robot Trump. So there it is. And when we come back, President Trump says he won't fire Robert Mueller, but that's not stopping the president's allies from trying to discredit the special counsel in the Russia investigation, but that's not stopping Team Trump's efforts to discredit Robert Mueller. Let's discuss now. John Flannery's here. He's a former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York. CNN political commentator David Swerdlick and former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Good evening to all three of you gentlemen. John, you first. President Trump was asked yesterday if he is planning on firing Robert Mueller. His answer was, no, I'm not. For the White House, they're discrediting Mueller and his team. Even better than, is that firing? Even better than firing him?
I think it's part of the same thing. I think if Trump was allowed to be Trump, he would have fired him ages ago. And I think that's always a looming possibility. But I think they've convinced him that by attacking Mueller in any way that they can, that maybe they'll diminish his effectiveness, maybe he'll go away.
But John, how can you attack him and then say, I expect to be exonerated then?
We're talking about Mr. Well, I'm sorry, we're talking about Mr. Trump. Consistency is not one of his problems. And, you know, look at the letter that they did with the GSA. They send it on a Saturday, so it's on the Sunday talk shows, and they don't go to court and complain about it. You know, all of it is pretty transparent. And then they ask the Congress, they have the Judiciary Committee ask the Attorney General to then investigate other things. And I think it's all a policy of obstruction. It's a little more subtle than just flat out firing someone. But I think the option's always there. And if they can't tie Trump to a wall someday, he will fire Mueller, and that'll be catastrophic.
So I've been, listen, David, I listen to everything and watch everything, right, from left to right. Right-wing media has been trying to discredit Mueller for months. I want you to watch. This is Janine Pirro on her Fox show this weekend.
There's a core group of arrogant, corrupt, and lawless individuals that felt that they, and not we, should decide a presidential election. And when they failed, they conspired to create the false narrative to not just muddy our choice for president, but to bring down his presidency and his family as well. The only thing that remains is whether we have the fortitude to not just fire these people immediately, but to take them out in cuffs.
She was a judge, right? It's probably a good thing she's not practicing anymore. But listen, her show is said to be a Trump favorite. She's even visited the president at the White House. How dangerous are comments like this?
It's dangerous for a couple of reasons. One, if she wants to be an objective journalist and offer opinions, then you would think she would want to hold the president himself at a little more of arm's length. But as you just said, and as has been reported, they sort of chit-chat offline and talk to each other and compare notes. At least that's what the reporting says. More specifically, Don, if you, in the clip that you just played, and I know that wasn't her entire soliloquy, but at least in that clip, she doesn't specify any situation or any fact which she says the Mueller investigation has gotten wrong or any procedure that they haven't followed. She's just talking in this swirl of, the president's enemies are out to get him. If that's really the case, if that's her argument, she should state where procedure was breached, where someone didn't follow protocol, what facts are wrong, why Flynn's plea deal is wrong, or why Manafort's indictment is wrong, but she goes to none of the specifics. Look, I'm not sure that Mueller is going to be fired, Don, if for no other reason than when Director Comey was fired is when the public's attention was really focused on the Russia investigation. And you've got to imagine that the White House staff is saying, if we fire Mueller, this is just going to, turn up the heat on this whole thing all over again. But this campaign that you see in certain media outlets and from some people in the government and from some of the Trump team's lawyers to discredit or undermine or throw the Mueller team off of their scent has really ratcheted up in the last couple of weeks.
It's just interesting. I mean, I'm sure it tastes good. Those words coming out of her mouth sounds good to the listener and the president. Yeah. She goes, "Ooh, the president's going to like if I say this, and the
Right.
viewers are going to like if I say that," instead of just saying what is actually.
But there's no specifics.
That's
no
what I mean.
specifics.
There's no specific, and there are no facts here, which is very, very interesting. So listen, the Trump transition. Go ahead.
Well, the prize is you get to go to Mar-a-Lago. I mean, she has one audience member at least who's just loving this. This is his nightlight, to just replay her. Yeah. And she's as much as an egomaniac as the fellow who enjoys it. And I did her show once, and she insists you call her judge, which I wouldn't do, which was very upsetting to her.
Well, I mean, listen, it's not a personal attack. You can see it all. You can see it all working there. How it works. The viewer loves to hear it. The president loves to hear it, and she likes the attention and the accolade. So listen, Trump transition. This is for Ronaldo. Trump transition lawyers say that Mueller's team unlawfully obtained thousands of emails from the transition team. In a rare statement, Mueller's team pushed back, saying in part, "When we have obtained emails in the course of our ongoing criminal investigation, we have secured either the account owner's consent or appropriate criminal process." So, Renato, you say this is a publicity stunt and not a serious legal challenge from the president's team. Why is that?
Well, these emails were on a government server. And there was actually contracts that were signed by the transition team saying that there is no expectation of privacy as to those emails. And that essentially ends this from a Fourth Amendment perspective. If you don't have an expectation of privacy, no one needs a warrant. It's like, for example, when you're using your employer's computer, for example, you know that when you're using CNN's computer, Don, your employer can go through it. Here they were using the transition that was using a government computer. They signed documents saying there's no expectation of privacy. That pretty much ends it. What they did here is they wrote a letter that essentially, if you're a lawyer and read it, you can read between the lines, they essentially admit that. They write the letter, I think as John was mentioning a moment ago, on a Saturday to Congress as opposed to Mueller. If they had a real legal argument, they would have gone to Mueller or gone to a court. There's really nothing there. And, it's more of trying to undermine Mueller. And I will tell you, I think what's happening now, we're starting to see that instead of making a decision to fire Mueller, what the Trump team has decided is that it's in their best interest to keep Mueller around, at least for now, and to try to discredit him. And it's led to that hateful rhetoric we just heard, which was obviously this conspiracy theory, over the top, unsupported, and very dangerous rhetoric. That's where it's leading.
Hey, John, how significant is it, if you can, a quick answer, because I want to get David in for one if I can. How significant is it that Mueller was forced to defend himself here?
Well, I think that he's feeling the pressure, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see an indictment before the end of the year to signal that this is very serious. I was surprised by that, and I think I would have said something like, if you had anything, you would have tried to take me to court or written to me personally. And they talk about a lawyer's privilege. What lawyer? Executive privilege. He wasn't yet the executive. So it's a very thin posturing politically, I think.
There was another point that I intended to make in the whole thing. We were talking about the soundbite there. Listen, most of the people on the transition team and these are appointed people. People were appointed by the President of the United States, or Republicans or career people who were in there. So how is it that there is some sort of coup or something that's happening from people, David, that the president appointed himself?
Yeah, and if you recall, Don, when Mueller was first appointed back in May, I mean, this was only 7 or 8 months ago. When he was first appointed back in May, you had Republicans on the Hill. You had Republican notables like former Speaker Newt Gingrich speaking about how Mueller was a man of the highest integrity, how they thought it was a good pick, how he would get to the bottom of things. And now that the investigation has sort of dragged out and has bogged the administration down, now you're seeing a situation where more supporters of the president are criticizing this. I would just point out, Don, real quick, that, look, anybody that's an adversary of the president that thinks that, you know, a shoe is going to drop and the administration is going to crumble, you know, I think they're going to be waiting a long time for that. Similarly, for the president's supporters, whether it's Judge Jeanine or someone else who think that this is going to, or the president himself, who think that this is just going to wrap up neatly in a few weeks and, you know, we'll wipe our hands and move on, nothing to see here. Neither side is going to have that. Mueller's going about this in a very methodical, specific, meticulous way, not talking a lot to the press, and we will find out as things develop, as we have over the last several months.
And that is the truth. You all three of you are very smart gentlemen, but that was the smartest thing that was said here. I agree with you on your entire point there, David. It's not that easy on either side. Yeah.
One step at a time.
Thank you very much. When we come back,
Thanks,
PBS has dropped Tavis Smiley's show after what's being called troubling allegations against him. Tonight, he is fighting back. I'm going to talk to him. That's next. Tavis Smiley, who hosted his own nightly interview show on PBS since 2004, fighting back tonight against what PBS calls troubling allegations about his conduct, but the network is standing by its decision to suspend his show. Joining me now is Tavis Smiley. Thank you so much.
Don, good to see you, man.
How are you
All
doing?
right. I'm well. And yourself?
Are you getting any rest? Because this, I mean, these are troubling allegations.
Not much rest at all, but I can tell you that we've had a bit of breaking news in this case. When I first came out a week ago and commented about this, I said very clearly that I had never groped, coerced, or inappropriately exposed myself to anyone. I said then that PBS had rushed to judgment here, that they had engaged a sloppy investigation. Essentially, they had not connected the dots and done their job. We just received a letter a couple hours ago from PBS after my appearance on Good Morning America today. And now, after 3 weeks of imploring them to talk to my staff, to my COO, to my HR people, to debunk whatever it is they've heard, which they refuse to do, they have now sent a letter this afternoon asking if they can meet with those very same people. This is after you've dragged my name through the mud, after you've trampled on my reputation, after you have impacted my earnings, after my sponsors have walked away from me. Now you want to come back and continue the investigation as a result of what happened today.
Do you think, and they released a statement after your interview this morning on the morning program, but do you think this changes the allegations against you? Because
the allegations have always been anonymous to me.
Okay.
What I have said consistently, again, is I have never groped, coerced, or exposed myself to anyone. I've never instructed anyone in my company to take any employment decision based upon my relationship status. And the bottom line is they did a sloppy investigation, and now they want to come back and continue what they should have done before they made this rush to judgment decision.
All right, these are the accusations, and then I want to read what they said. This is according to Variety. According to sources, MSK, which is a firm they hired, took reports from 10 witnesses, a mix of men and women of different races and employment levels in Smiley's organization, most of them former staffers. The investigation found credible allegations that Smiley had engaged in sexual relationships with multiple subordinates, sources said. Some witnesses interviewed expressed concern that their employment status was linked to the status of a sexual relationship with Smiley. 10 witnesses, credible allegations, multiple subordinates. That seems pretty significant.
That statement has a lot in it. First of all, men and women. We don't know, because I don't know what the accusations are. I don't know what the allegations are, who the accusers were. I don't know what that number of men and women is. What if it's 8 men and 2 women? Not to suggest that 2 women's stories don't matter, but after 30 years of being in business, I've hired a lot of folk and we've fired a lot of folk. And there are some folk who have some axes to grind. And I don't think this moment is a moment that should be used, this important moment in this country, talking about how to create a healthy workplace. This should not be used, Don, to exploit wanting to grind, should not be used in an exploitative way to grind an axe or to seek revenge on someone. And so, again, I sat for 3 hours in these conversations. I was never told what the allegations were, who the accusers were, never allowed to provide any evidence, was not given due process, what happened to the presumption of innocence in this country. So again, you're reading a statement that they told a Variety, and they didn't tell me this stuff. I learned more from that Variety article than I learned in 3 hours of a face-to-face conversation.
So what does it change for you now that they are going to, you said that they're going to...
They've asked to talk to the persons on my staff who run the company, who make all of the employment decisions. We said that 3 weeks ago, and they refused to do it. They made this rush to judgment, trampled on me. Now they want to come back and continue the investigation.
Do you think that would change, though, again, the allegations against you? Do you think that would change?
I repeat again, when you don't know what the allegations against you are, it's hard to answer that question. What I do know is that it shows again, I think we're missing the key point here. It shows again
that they rushed to judgment.
Exactly, and did a sloppy investigation. Yeah. So how do you come back today? Yeah. How do you come back today after all this national outpouring, this national outrage about the way this investigation was conducted, that you denied me due process? How do you come back now?
So you're saying they should have done that before releasing all this information?
Yeah, sure.
So this is what, after your interview this morning, they said, Tavis Smiley needs to get his story straight. First, today on Good Morning America, Mr. Smiley acknowledged he had multiple sexual encounters with his employees, then struggled to recall the number of current employees with whom he had sex. This contradicts his Facebook post from last week, where he cited only one previous relationship with an employee. I'm going to stop there, and then we'll put it back up. You want to? What do you say to that?
I don't know what interview they were watching. Number one, I didn't disconnect anything. What I said in my statement was that if having a consensual relationship with a colleague, I didn't say one colleague, I said a colleague. I'm talking about a colleague, a coworker. So I never said one, number one. So I didn't change my story this morning on Good Morning America. I told the truth this morning, and I told the truth in my statement, number one. What else do you have that you want?
How many colleagues have you had consensual relationships?
That very question conflates consensual relationships with sexual assault, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct. That's not the right question, quite frankly.
Why not? Why do you say?
I just told you why. Because that very question conflates a consensual relationship with sexual harassment or sexual assault, and those two things don't.
I understand that, but we can talk about that. But that doesn't mean that if I've had a consensual relationship with someone in the workplace, wouldn't I know how many
that's not,
had? And I can explain to you this was consensual and this wasn't.
Exactly. And I know what was consensual. First of all, there was nothing that was not consensual. I've only had in my entire life. I've only had consensual relationships. And most of them, over 30 years of working in this industry, most of them clearly were not in the workplace. So we're talking about a handful of conversations.
Mr. Smiley even told viewers, I don't know where your heart is going to lead you. PBS is certain that it should not lead to multiple sexual relationships between the owner of a company and subordinates over many years, particularly where employment decisions may be linked to sex. So if a woman is, even though you say it's consensual, but a woman may feel obliged to go along with it because she's concerned about her employment. That's how most people would read that.
Here again, this is PBS's rhetoric. So today, we go back to the beginning of this conversation. Today, they finally agreed to talk to the persons who could have addressed those issues had they raised these questions with those persons 3 weeks ago. My point is, how do you put those kinds of statements out, without ever having talked to the folk who were responsible for making these decisions? And here's the last question for me, is that why are you making these statements to the press? Why are you talking to the press and not my attorneys? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they know how to contact my attorneys, but they keep making these comments in the press rather than talking to my attorneys.
You understand the power dynamic that's
Absolutely.
going on. If you are the president of the company, Tavis, and you're having a relationship with someone, should you have known better?
What I said this morning, I stand by, which is that there are people who have an opinion that there is no such thing, Don, as a consensual relationship in the workplace. I respect that decision, and I hear that. In my company, we have a policy that does not encourage office relationships, but it doesn't forbid them. Because again, I don't want to tell people who they should hang out with, who they should fall in love with. And there's so many relationships in this country that were started in the workplace. Henry Kissinger met his wife in the workplace. Bill Gates met his wife in the workplace. We all know Barack Obama met Michelle Obama in the workplace. So my point is that relationships can start in the workplace. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But let's not act like we don't live in a society where people work and meet each other all the time, and sometimes things jump off.
So your point is, you think, obviously, we've been having this back and forth, you think that everything is being conflated. A consensual relationship and someone who is abusive in the relationship, from Harvey Weinstein to the person who met his wife, you think they're all being lumped in one category?
That's what they've attempted to do with me. I am not Harvey Weinstein. And I don't know all the particulars of his case. I don't want to prejudge him. What I'm suggesting to you is that I, again, have never groped, coerced, exposed myself to anyone. The sin that I've committed, the great sin, is to have over 30 years a handful of consensual relationships. And if that's the crime, if we're going to start criminalizing people for having legitimate relationships as consenting adults, if that's the crime, then let's just say that. But don't drag me through the mud, damage my reputation, and then come back and say, okay, we're going to continue the investigation.
Would you do, considering all the high-profile people, all the big personalities, the people who have lost their platforms, their jobs, their livelihoods, would you do anything differently now?
Oh, as you know, I've been on this program before. I've written a couple of books two specifically come to mind, talking about the mistakes I've made and the lessons I've learned. There are a number of things I did, 25, 30 years ago that I wouldn't do now. But even again, if one or two of those consensual relationships was a case of misjudgment, I ask you, does that misjudgment rise to the level of public shaming, personal destruction, and wrongful termination? For me, it does not. Not for me or anybody else.
What about the women who feel, according to this investigation, that they were hurt by you? What do you say to them? Do you apologize to them?
I don't know. Again, I am more than happy to apologize to anyone I've offended. But I repeat again, I was never told who the accusers were. I don't know what the allegations were. And in a consensual relationship, as you know, you can prove what a consensual relationship is. You've got letters, cards, gifts, text messages.
Texting is one way you have a relationship.
Photographs, but who doesn't? That's the world we live in nowadays. But again, I was never asked, never given an opportunity to prove that something was consensual because it was never raised in that meeting.
Everybody's lost it. A lot of people lost their jobs.
Yeah.
Some people didn't get to go to the Senate because of all this stuff. How is Tavis Smiley different? Tavis Smiley is innocent of all this?
Tavis Smiley has only had consensual relationships. And speaking of people who've lost jobs, that's how I feel. I've got a staff full of people because of PBS's rush to judgment who are now in the unemployment line during the holiday season. And that does not make me happy.
Do you plan to take legal action against them?
My attorneys are looking at that right now. I don't want to get ahead of them. I will tell you this, that if this in fact does end up in court, because now that they've come back and asked to continue the investigation, it's a little late on a certain level. If this does end up in court, the real tragedy is that millions of taxpayer dollars are going to be spent for PBS to defend itself against this bad decision, and that's not how I think the American people want their tax dollars spent.
Tavis, thank you.
Thank you, Don.
And when we come back, a report tonight that President Trump considered rescinding the Supreme Court nomination of Neil Gorsuch after Gorsuch criticized him. Sounds like loyalty is not exactly a two-way street in this White House. We all know how much President Trump values loyalty, but a new report tonight suggests that that need for loyalty could have cost him a major accomplishment. Let's discuss now. CNN political commentators Angela Ryan, Scott Jennings, both here. Hello to both of you. Scott, you first. The Washington Post reporting tonight that earlier this year, President Trump considered rescinding his nomination of Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court due to a perceived lack of loyalty on Gorsuch's part, specifically when Gorsuch expressed displeasure with the president's attacks on the judiciary. Does this president need thicker skin? What do you think of this?
I think the Washington Post tonight is playing gossip girl here for no reason at all. I mean, the reality is I went to breakfast this morning and considered having a cheese Danish and made a much better decision to have bacon and eggs. So the president did the right thing. He left Gorsuch up. It's his main accomplishment this year. It's a great one. And I don't see what the big deal is.
Ansel, do you see what the big deal is? Do you agree with Scott?
Of course I don't agree. I think the challenge that I have here is this word that keeps coming up and it permeates this administration. And Donald Trump is under the delusion and the illusion that people owe him a loyalty pledge rather than taking that oath, passing the bar as now Justice Gorsuch had to do. And his oath is to uphold the Constitution. In his role as a Supreme Court justice, it is to ensure that he interprets the Constitution. I'm not always going to, and probably 9 times out of 10 won't agree with how his interpretation plays out. But he does not owe Donald Trump his loyalty. He owes his loyalty to the bench. There are 3 branches of government. The judiciary is one. And I don't know how many times we've said, whether it was during the campaign, whether it was during the transition period, or it was after he was sworn into office, this is not normal. This is not an authoritarian government. There are 3 branches of government, all to hold one or the other accountable. This is not about your cheese Danish, Scott. This is about ensuring that you understand that you have to uphold the law, not Donald Trump's fragile ego.
Okay, but let me put it this way, because Judge Gorsuch is often among the accomplishments that this president touts, right? Him joining the Supreme Court. So that's one of the first things he mentions. He could have, his need for a loyalty test, that could have cost him big, because then, maybe by the end of the year he'll have the tax cut or the tax overhaul as an accomplishment. But so far he doesn't have any major legislative achievement. Wouldn't that have hurt him, Scott?
Well, it would have hurt him if they had pulled Gorsuch down, but they didn't. And I think best I can see here, Neil Gorsuch had sent the president a letter expressing his gratitude for being nominated, which is an appropriate thing to do. Someone in the mailroom misplaced it. It finally made it to the president's desk. And I think maybe the president here didn't realize that part of the issue with Supreme Court justice nominees is they frequently get asked, almost always get asked, will you have any trouble whatsoever ruling against this administration that nominated you? And of course, Gorsuch answered it just right. I don't have trouble ruling against anybody if that's what the law and the facts call for. So I think what we have here is a president who made a good decision, a Supreme Court justice who is making good decisions in his new job, people who were acting appropriately in sort of a gossip column tonight that really doesn't have any bearing on the facts as they exist today. This is a major presidential accomplishment, and Gorsuch is a great justice.
Scott, I just want to push back on you a little bit, though. This buzzword loyalty that came up when we talked about FBI Director Comey's firing. This is an issue, and I think technically you can call this a gossip girl or a gossip boy column if you want to, but to me this is a red flag and something that, again, should go towards whether there's any type of obstruction of justice issue. Not because he's intending to, but perhaps because he doesn't know any better. Like he doesn't know any better about whether or not folks ask Senate confirmed, or folks that have to get Senate confirmation, whether it's to the judiciary or to serve in the cabinet. This is a big issue. Your loyalty pledge is not to the president. Your loyalty is to this country and trying to make decisions that are constitutionally appropriate.
I want to change the subject. This is another Washington Post report. The White House planning and this is them, quote, a full throttle campaign to plunge the president into midterm elections, adding that aides have met with 116 candidates for office in recent months. Angela, is that a smart move?
To meet with candidates?
Yeah, and to plunge this president into midterm elections.
I think they need to do whatever they can. Again, we are talking about his ego. He needs to feel like he's winning, right? It's supposed to be the most times America's ever won. He needs to start with midterm results. Right now, if you're looking at special elections, that's certainly not his track record.
I just want to ask because, Scott, it's no secret the president is facing historically low approval rating. So I ask the same question to you.
Yeah, I lived through a cycle like this in 2006 when I was in the White House Office of Political Affairs under George W. Bush. We had a president that had a low approval rating, and so we had to decide strategically where was the best place for the president to campaign. He wouldn't have been helpful in all districts or in all states, but there were places where he was helpful. I can tell you one place where the president and vice president, no matter their approval rating, is always helpful, and that is on the fundraising circuit. Vice President Pence has been out there raising money for candidates in the party. The president, if he so chooses to do it, would be an enormous fundraising draw for just about any candidate, party, committee, whatever, out there anywhere in the country. So my advice would be for the president, if he wants to really make an impact, hit the fundraising circuit and then let his political affairs shop, which is led, by the way, by a very smart operative named Bill Stepien, let them decide strategically where he makes the most sense for public events.
All right, when we come back, Don Jr., Senator Ted Cruz, and a cookie with the former President Obama's face on it. What do they have to do with each other? We'll explain. Angela and Scott are back with me. I want to play part of the president's national security speech today.
A nation without borders is not a nation. A nation that does not protect prosperity at home cannot protect its interests abroad. A nation that is not prepared to win a war is a nation not capable of preventing a war. A nation that is not proud of its history cannot be confident in its future. And a nation that is not certain of its values cannot summon the will to defend them.
All right, there's a lot to discuss there, but Angela, let's take the last line where he says a nation that is not proud of its history cannot be confident in its future. What do you think that means, what he means by that?
I have no idea. What I can tell you that is most concerning to me is I have no real clue about whether or not Donald Trump understands what our true history is. I don't think that there's a requirement that we have to be proud of everything in America's past to be able to move forward, right? I think that that's actually asinine. Like, there are a number of things that we should not be proud of. And I think that the most important thing we can do to take a step forward and to ensure that the country is putting its best foot forward is to recognize the many challenges in our history. The fact that he talks about borders, standing up borders, and that a nation without borders isn't a nation at all. A lot of those ideas are circular and ridiculous. And again, I think even the America First ideology is also ridiculous. Donald Trump has consistently demonstrated that self-preservation is most important to him, even if it means scapegoating people on his own team. I hardly think that's a foreign policy and a national security agenda and strategy that will work.
I want to put this up, Scott, because this is, a lot of folks have been talking about this. This is Donald Trump Jr. posted this picture of himself and Senator Ted Cruz yesterday with a cookie that appears to show the face of President Barack Obama. The Instagram caption says, "With friends like these, some good friends decided that while my birthday is not for 2 weeks, that they would get me an early 40th birthday cake. And what birthday is complete without an Obama cake? I figured it was so good that I would have to share it with Ted." What do you think? Was it appropriate? Because it caused a bit of a stir online.
You know, I'm proud to see the evolution of the Cruz relationship with the Trumps. I mean, we've gone from the president, then candidate, accusing Ted Cruz's dad of assassinating JFK to him posing with the president's son in an Obama cake. So if Barack Obama accomplished one thing, bringing the Cruzes and the Trumps together, hey, that's an accomplishment we can all be proud of. So good for them.
Seriously? Meanwhile, the cake looks more like Tavis Smiley.
It was a cookie.
Or whatever it was.
Yeah.
The cookie, it looks like Tavis Smiley. That does not look like Barack Obama. Sorry.
Well, they
Did
didn't
you
make
see it, Don?
I saw
roll
it.
Roll that back.
What did we say?
Maybe
it looked
kind of
like
Grant
earlier?
Hill.
Like Grant Hill, yeah. Oh, well. Y'all are crazy.
You give up. You're like, forget it.
I do forget it. I was
about
just
it.
like, you know. When just,
Who is that on the cake? I mean,
I
it
can't
does
believe
kind of
that
look
Don
like
Jr.
Tavis.
would make that face and send it out. But
Yeah, that's a whole nother issue.
Well, I mean, are
That's
you guys
awful.
some sort of like cake boss, cake artist that I don't know about?
No,
Could you do
but
a better
like-
job? I mean, it's like really difficult to draw a picture on a piece of paper, let alone a cake.
But
Leave
that's
this
why I
guy
don't do it
alone.
for a
Believe you,
living.
are you really fighting this like it's a big deal? Like, number one, like we're all laughing about it. It's not that serious, but it doesn't look like Barack Obama. It's just because it's red, white, and blue and a black guy doesn't make it Barack Obama.
we are going to have our cake and eat it too. I didn't know what else to say. Bye, y'all. Good night. That's it for us. Thanks for watching.